You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports. Only on the Ignotainment Media Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll be discussing the announcement by Dana White that he's holding a date for the UFC to put on an event in New York this December, despite the fact that the state, of course, currently prohibits pro MMA. We'll also review this past Saturday's debut of Premier Boxing Champions on NBC and examine what it means for the sport of boxing moving forward. Plus, John will tell the story of his encounter with Art Jimerson the week of the inaugural UFC, which didn't end well for one of them. And as we do on every episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. Ask away via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. That's info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. John, last Friday, UFC President Dana White was on Access TV's Inside MMA, on which he said that he is, quote, confident that pro MMA will soon be legalized in the state of New York. So confident, in fact, that the UFC is holding a December date at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, you know what? It's he's been confident quite a few times, and I don't blame him. You know, they've done a lot of work to get the sport of MMA, as far as professional, legalized in New York, and that was thwarted by I'm really not even going to say his name. Thwarted by a politician who is now arrested under indictment. So it kind of speaks to the integrity of that person. And I really believe that I think Dana's right this time. I think MMA in the state of New York, people will be seeing it legalized here within this year. You know, will they be able to get the date, you know, by December or something like that? I can't say that for sure. You know, they know way more than I do. But I think finally professional MMA is going to be coming to the state of New York, which it should have done, you know, how many years ago? It was one of the first states that legalized it, and then George Pataki took it away. I can go into all those old days and what really happened, but it's going to be really nice to see New York getting along with the rest of the union.
Well, John, you and I are stressing the word professional MMA because amateur MMA, has been allowed in New York across the state, including in Manhattan. So when people say MMA is not legal, that's not correct. It's pro MMA. I saw that. I live in Kansas City. I'm on the Kansas side, but I saw that in Missouri. I went to a lot of public ticketed MMA events. They were quote unquote amateur. They were more like semi-professional, even professional. But this was before the state of Missouri Athletic Commission legalized, recognized pro MMA. So it's going on throughout the state. And as a caveat to that, there is pro MMA actually in the state of New York. It's just taking place on sovereign land at tribal casinos, tribal commissions. Some are ABC, some are not ABC members. So to say that New York bans it, it's almost sloppy journalism, I think, by a lot of people in the media who should know better.
Yeah, it is. It's, you know, MMA has been going on in New York for, you know, well, let's be honest, since, you know, the UFC started, it's been going on in New York. Back at UFC 7, we were in Buffalo, New York, you know, and had a really huge show there at the old Odd. You know, it tried to take it back there at UFC 12 to Niagara, and there was, you know, little political firestorms that were going on all over because, you know, a certain senator had, you know, tried to change things. But there was a lot of background in what really happened there. And the background of that was the UFC had made a deal. They had a lobbyist. I'll never forget the guy's name. It was Featherstone Haw. And he, look, how do you forget that name?
It's like in the Wolf Blitzer category. You can't make that
just
up.
About. But he was a very powerful lobbyist, and he actually got the sport legalized and signed off by Governor George Pataki in New York. But they had made a deal. The UFC had made a deal. The owner at the time was Bob Meyerowitz. He had made a deal that he would not take the UFC to Manhattan. He would do shows in Albany. He would do shows in Niagara. He would do shows in Buffalo. He would do shows in the outlying cities until the state of New York was comfortable with MMA and what was going on. And then he would be able to bring it to Manhattan, go to Madison Square Garden where everyone would want to go. And what happened was there was, other promotions. There was a promotion, Battlecade Extreme Fighting, and Zuckerman was one of the owners of that. And he immediately came out in the New York Times and said, "We are going to Madison Square Garden." And that just threw a wrench into everything. And so New York quickly tried to figure out a way to, stop it. And they did. They came up with a rule book for the sport of MMA. I got it. It was 114 pages long, and it had, they had to wear headgear. They wore boxing gloves. If there was a knockdown, that they were brought back to their feet. There was no holding allowed. It was basically amateur boxing is what they had for the rule books. And so, we went to court on that, and that was the first one that we were going to lose because they were saying, well, you can have it. You just have to do it under our rules. And that's when it was moved to Dothan, Alabama. Well, MMA has stayed in the state of New York. It's just been in non-sanctioned events, which are bad. We can't have unregulated events. The ISKA has come in there, and the ISKA is a good sanctioning body that uses good people. They do good regulation. They've come in and done a lot of amateur shows in New York. There's some other amateur shows being done on sovereign land. There's some that are being done, like I said, unregulated. Those are all bad. If it's ever unregulated, bad things can happen because look at, a small time promoter is trying to save money. Well, they save money by cutting anything that they can, including doctors and medicals and all the things that really keep our fighters safe before they get into that cage or ring, and they cut those things out, and that's what leads to problems. So, the amateur MMA that's been going on in MMA in New York, has been going on for a long time. It's just that the state of New York needs to get with the rest of the nation and, legalize it, regulate it, do all the things that you think are important to keep the fighters safe. That's what we're looking for. And let's see a UFC in Madison Square Garden. It would be fantastic.
John, a huge point of contention for me, New York and any state. This was the case a decade ago in the state of Missouri. If you're a quote-unquote amateur, and maybe you're not an AMI because there's a fine line. Maybe you got paid under the table. Maybe you didn't get paid, but you got a percentage of ticket sales, or you got a consignment, or maybe there was a separate appearance fee. So there's a real blurred line between AMI and pro. If you're AMI, you're not going to get recorded in the databases like SureDog under a pro fight, but that doesn't mean you didn't get paid. All of that aside, though, if you're competing in mixed martial arts, I think you deserve protection, whether you're fighting in the main event for the UFC or Bellator, or whether you're fighting at a Ramada Inn ballroom in your AMI debut. Why shouldn't you have a doctor cage side? Why shouldn't you have your hands properly wrapped? Why shouldn't you have an inspector check your hand wraps and your opponent's hand wraps? Why shouldn't there be a cup check and a mouthpiece check? Why shouldn't the judges, the referees be properly trained? Just because they're an AMI fight or quote-unquote AMI fights, I don't know why a state, New York, or any state can or in the past can say, well, it's fine, then we're not going to worry about it. Totally hypocritical.
It's just backwards when you look at it. We get a lot of states that say, well, we cover, professional this, we cover professional that, but we don't cover amateur. And you look and you go, how is it that we don't take care of our amateurs as much as we take care of our professionals? These are people that are going to be the professionals. These are the ones that are coming up. We have to take care of them as much, if not more, than the professional fighter in making sure that everything is safe for them. These are people that are going out, they're not making money, and they have a job to go to the next day. We need to protect them. We need to make sure that no one is taking advantage of them. We need to make sure that everything is being done to allow them to compete in a safe atmosphere as much as we do for the professionals. And if we're not doing that, we're missing the boat. We're leaving the door open on something that can end up being a travesty that we don't want to have happen. And you're seeing a lot of athletic commissions have very stringent rules on amateurs. New Jersey has very stringent rules on their amateurs, and they do a great job with them. Ohio has that. California with Camo has an incredible program. going on for amateurs, but see, people still complain because they'll sit there and they'll say, but they're an amateur. Why do they have to get a blood test? Why do they have to do this? Why do they have to do that? And you look and you go, are you kidding me? This is fighting. This is a different type of activity than, playing baseball or going out and having a softball team. This is different. We have people this is the hurt business. And in the hurt business, people get hurt, and we're trying to protect them from being unnecessarily harmed by things that they have no control of if we don't take care of it as a regulatory body.
John, you've mentioned a couple of states. My home state, Kansas. Tonight, with your favorite 9-year-old and mine, my 9-year-old girl, Ellie, we're going to a split pro-am MMA card on the Kansas side, in the Kansas City suburb of Overland Park. The AMI fighters and the pro fighters are going to be treated the same in preparation. They will still have to submit to a pre-fight physical. They will have the same benefit of the inspectors. It's going to be the same referees, the same judges. There will be a physician. It's not as though the physician gets up and leaves for the AMI fights. If someone is injured, there's the ambulance. That, to me, is how it should be. If you want to put in certain rules in your state with pro and AMI, if you want to play with the minutes or what is and isn't allowed, if you feel that maybe that's something to enact, that's one thing. But to say, well, we're just not going to worry about it because it's AMI fighting, it's AMI MMA, so we don't need to have a physician there, or we don't need anybody who's an inspector checking hand wraps. It's ridiculous. It's negligent, actually.
Well, yeah, see, and it's ridiculous because you've seen it, and everyone sits there and we joke about, certain things in life, but, who wants to play Russian roulette? Let's be honest. You got to have a screw loose to play Russian roulette. And that's what they're doing when they have fights going on and they don't have a qualified, and I mean qualified, ringside physician, because, you can even just say doctor. There's a difference between being a doctor and a ringside physician. A doctor takes a Hippocratic oath about they're there to care for people. And it's very difficult for a ringside physician to do his job both as a medical person and for what the sport and fans need out of a fight. It's a hard, line to walk. It's a razor thin edge at sometimes, and it takes a really skilled person to be able to do that job correctly. So to not have it to where exactly what you're saying, there is no difference between the amateur programs and the professional programs. The real difference is professionals get paid. The amateurs are doing it to gain experience, learn how to handle the lights, learn how to handle the pressure of the crowd, the pressure of a weigh-in, all of these things to get themselves ready for their professional career if this is what they want to do, so it doesn't become overwhelming and they end up imploding upon themselves in that first pro fight.
John, I want to go back to the MMA, the UFC in New York. So UFC 7, as you mentioned, it was the second one under Bob Meyerowitz. Art Davey and Horion Gracie and WoW Promotions sold out to Meyerowitz after UFC 5. So it's the second one after Meyerowitz, September 8, 1995 in Buffalo. You said at the Odd, where the Sabres of the NHL used to call home. You refereed the card. If you don't remember this card immediately and you're a hardcore, I'm going to jog your memory. In the tournament final, Marco Huas defeated Paul Varlands. Just vicious leg kicks against the polar bear. And
Kicks don't work in fights. I've heard that. Oh, maybe they do.
Art Davies said that was the first time I saw someone with submission skills actually know how to strike. He thought Huas was a turning point fighter. I remember watching that on pay-per-view at home thinking, wow, I've never seen thigh kicks like that. And then there was the super fight, Ken Shamrock versus Oleg Taktarov, which ended in a draw. When you went into New York, it was really no big deal. And it almost seemed to me as a fan back then that it was a natural progression, because as a huge boxing and pro wrestling fan who came to MMA from UFC 1, New York just kind of seemed like an epicenter. Why wouldn't you have a fight in New York? And as a fan, knowing nothing, I thought at the time, well, they're in Buffalo. Yeah, they're going to be at Madison Square Garden pretty soon.
Yeah, I think everyone else was kind of thinking that too, but it just didn't turn out that way. But, if you go back and you watch that show, obviously, there's some things in it that are, going on that are a little odd. You got David Abbott, since he made his debut at UFC 6 and became a superstar. I think he started doing a dance up on the catwalk of the octagon along with the ring card girls. But, really.
Sorry, John, was that the point when you thought, maybe refereeing isn't such a good decision for me? What have I gotten into?
Sometimes some of the things you have to watch. You say, "Oh, my eyes! I want to be blind." But, It's that show was a good show. I mean, it had a huge crowd. I don't remember what the odd had as far as the capacity, but the attendance was huge. It was the biggest show they had ever done, attendance wise, pay-per-view wise, anything. And it was pointing towards the future. Hey, this is going good. You had someone like Marco Huas coming in and adding a new element towards, hey, I'm not just a grappler or a striker, I'm both. Because he had fights where, he won by submission against Larry Curtin. And then he goes and he fights, Remco Pardue, and Remco, is on top of him. And when he gets mounted, he just taps. He says, that's it, I'm done. I can't deal with this guy. And then he gets into the finals against Paul Varlins, the polar bear. And Paul's huge and just systematically broke him down with leg kicks to the point where he chopped him down like a tree and then ended the fight. It was a new beginning as far as showing people, well, you know what, that kicking stuff does work. It just, you got to have other elements to back it up. And we were all thinking, this is great. And pretty quick, because UFC 8 is where we started going to court, we realized, maybe things aren't so great.
Why do you think New York has been the last holdout? Now, there are states that have been slow to put in an athletic commission or still don't have one, like Alaska. But why do you think New York is the last holdout? Connecticut's been a holdout for a long time, but people forget that because of Mohegan Sun, which is tribal land, not the state of Connecticut. But Connecticut was one of the last holders out of legalizing professional MMA outside of sovereign Native American territory. It's just amazing. New York, which has been a fight epicenter really since the 1880s with bare knuckles boxing, London prize ring rules boxing, that they're the ones in 2015 that are still rejecting pro MMA.
Yeah, but you know what? Look at everything about why New York has not had pro MMA. None of it has to do with MMA. Let's be honest. It's politics. And, politics rule the world, and that's just the way it is. And when you want to do business, in certain places, there's things that have occurred. Dana has had wars with the Las Vegas Culinary Union. That's a union that has gone and within New York has tried to, cause problems with the, MMA getting into New York as a professional sport, only to ban the UFC. If it was Bellator trying to bring it into New York, you wouldn't have seen the same reaction. I don't think you would have seen it there quicker. It has to do with, Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta are the majority owners of the UFC. They run station casinos all over. And station casinos are non-union casinos. And New York happens to be a huge union city. And with the Culinary Union having, issues with the UFC and all the stuff that they've tried to do, they just have tried to put a wrench in the works the whole time to try to block them, to, be an irritation. They've done that. And it's worked for them up to the point where one of their political cronies got arrested. And now maybe things will change. And that's just the way life works.
John, and there are people who still, and I think it's an ignorant opinion, and I'm not one to call names. I'm from Shawnee, Kansas. I'm not raised to call anybody names, and I don't throw around the word ignorant lightly. But it's an ignorant opinion when people say it, whether they believe it or not. These are common social commentators, media people, politicians. Well, MMA is brutal. So in the state of New York, pro boxing is legal, pro kickboxing is legal, pro Muay Thai is legal, but pro MMA is illegal because it's apparently brutal. Now, just as a personal aside, I go to Muay Thai 2 times a week. I get absolutely pummeled. That beating is a lot worse, a lot more painful than the regular beatings I take at my grappling class, John. And anybody who says that they want one combat sport but not another, I don't get that. At least have integrity to say I'm against combat sports. I fundamentally disagree with that stance, but I can sort of respect the logic, maybe the passivity of it. But to say, well, this one and this one, they're okay, but this one's too brutal. Again, it's an ignorant statement. It's an ignorant position.
Well, it is, but it's backed by issues that have nothing to do with the actual combat sports. They have to do with politics. They have to do with unions, and they have to do with people, trying to get at somebody through a system that they can actually do it. They can't take them head on, but they can worm their way through trying to, put up a dam, put up that little barricade to keep them out of the one thing that entity wants. And that's what's happened. And you look at, People have, all kinds of ideas. And, when you're looking at, what combat sports do, again, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to ever sit here and tell someone that, what, fighting is good for your body. Well, it's good for your body in some ways, as far as the training for it, as far as getting in shape, being in excellent physical condition, having an incredible cardiovascular system, being physically strong and fit, understanding, how to do certain things, the flexibility that you need to do it. All of that is good for your body. Now, the actual competition, which is actually the funnest part because the training is miserable, and the dieting for it is miserable, and every part of it is not that fun. The competition is your payoff. And I'm not going to sit here and say, but that's good for you. No, there's things that happen in that competition that are bad for your body. But in every sport, we have things that are bad for the athlete. If you're going to look at MMA, people say it's brutal. They don't understand it. And it's just a term that they're using to try to blanket something that they don't understand. When you look at, boxing compared to kickboxing, compared to Muay Thai, compared to MMA, they all have their elements that are more violent in ways than others. If you're going to sit here and ask me, is boxing more violent than MMA? No, it's not. MMA is more violent only because you're allowed to do more. You have more tools. You have more things to attack. You have the ability to kick your opponent. You have the ability to knee your opponent. You have the ability to throw elbows. You have the ability to pick your opponent up over your head, 6 feet off of the ground, we'll say, and slam them to the surface. Well, if you've ever had that done, which I have, it sucks. Okay, it hurts. It's not something that, we want to have happen. It does happen in the sport because it's part of our sport and it's a good part of our sport, but boxing doesn't have that. So MMA is more violent, but I will tell you that boxing is more damaging. Overall, if you look at the sports, boxing is incredibly damaging because we really only have 2 targets that we attack. And 90% of the fighters go after the head 90% of the time. And so we have just concussive blows to our head happening over and over and over and over again. Our brain is the most important element we have. And so if you're going to say, what's the most damaging between all of the sports? It would be boxing.
Yeah, I fully agree. Pugilistic dementia. A lot of people say Parkinson's disease. People, and we won't get into it here, but people need to study up the difference between Parkinson's disease and Parkinson's syndrome. Muhammad Ali suffers from Parkinson's syndrome, not Parkinson's disease. So I think excellent points, John. My last thing for this, don't you think that ultimately in contentious issues, greed usually wins out? That ultimately in New York, whether people like MMA, they like combat sports, they hate it, whatever, they're going to think our state is losing out to Connecticut with Mohegan Sun. We're losing out to New Jersey. We're losing out to Las Vegas. We're losing out to Southern California. Oftentimes, I think economics and economic stimulus, regardless, wins out.
It's so true. It's like, if you look at the economic impact that bringing a UFC to New York will make, to the athletic commission, it's going to make some money, but it's the hotels, it's the taxi cabs, it's the restaurants, it's all of it. How many people are going to, especially in the first one, let's be honest. The first show at Madison Square Garden is going to sell out, in the first hour. All the tickets will be gone.
Yeah, and that's regardless of who fights. They don't even have to announce.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's New York locals or anything. You'd want to put someone like, I would think, a Chris Weidman, on that card because he's from, that area and he's the champ. So you'd want to put somebody like him. But, anybody you put on that card, it's going to sell out just because it's the event. It's the first one since it was put into the realm of being illegal in New York. Now it's back in Madison Square Garden, probably one of the greatest, historical venues when it comes to fighting there is. And, it's going to do incredible numbers. There's going to be incredible amounts of people coming to the state of New York that don't live in New York to come to that show. All of this has an economic impact, and that is good for the state of New York. It's good for the city of New York. And you look and you go, it's only going to be a good thing. And they'll see it's a good thing. But, it just has taken time to get there. Eventually, it'll get there. It's inevitable. It's
it
just
is,
inevitable.
isn't it? It absolutely.
Yes, it is.
Do you think by December?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I honestly, this time, I think it might be. The real question is by December, it depends upon when they actually legalize it and what they say they need to do for implementation of legislation for rules, training of officials, how they're going to do things. They may put a window on that to say we need to do it within this much time, and it actually goes past that December of 2015 date, and it could be where, they have up until, we'll say February of 2016, and that would be your first show. But it's going to be close.
Every week here on Let's Get It On, John and I will answer your questions. Email whatever you'd like to ask us to info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. As Jimmy Smith can attest, I am completely obsessed with pronunciation, so please give pronunciation instructions if you have a difficult last name. Again, email us info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. First one, this was an easy name for me to pronounce, Samuel Gold. Although, if he had been a fighter, I would have said, is it Gold or is it Jold? So, but it's Samuel Gold, I'm pretty sure. So Samuel asked...
Samuel Gold. My mother's maiden name is Gold. That's probably my cousin right there.
unless he's Dutch and be Gold, but I don't think he is, actually.
All right.
John, I heard there has been a rule change regarding what is considered a downed fighter. Is this true? If so, John, could you explain the new ruling on what is considered a downed fighter?
Well, let's see. There really hasn't been a rule change on what is considered a ground fighter. A ground fighter has remained the same, even though people have a false idea of what it is, including fighters and trainers. Everyone thinks it's 3 points of contact. You got to have 3 points of contact. That is not true. Anything more than just the soles of the feet on the ground makes the fighter a down fighter, meaning that if I have 1 foot on the ground and 1 hand and my other foot's up in the air, that's 2 points of contact, but I am a grounded fighter. If I am sitting on my butt with my feet up in the air, okay, almost like in an attack position to kick, and my hands are off of the mat, so it's only my butt on the ground, I am a grounded fighter. Anything more than just the soles of my feet on the ground makes the fighter a grounded fighter. But the real change I think that you might be talking about, and what I as an official and other officials are doing, is we have fighters that try to play with the rule of scraping their hand on the ground. They have 1 finger down or something like that. And we're telling the fighters, look, if you need to make yourself a grounded fighter, you can do that. But I am telling you, if you make yourself a grounded fighter, I want you to have weight bearing on your hand, meaning that your hand is actually holding weight. So your opponent can't just kick the hand out and bring up a knee or something like that. I want weight to be put onto it. That's when we're going to say you're grounded. And when you put yourself in that position as a grounded fighter, keep your hand on the ground until you're going to get up. And when you decide to get up, we're telling you, you have to get up, because we don't want the fighter getting in a position where they think that they can pull their hand up and they see a knee being thrown, and now they're going to take and try to put their hand back down on the ground to make themselves grounded. Because we need everyone to understand is, if the knee was thrown while the hand was in the air, it does not matter if the hand hits the ground before the knee hits the head. It is a legal knee. It was thrown while the hand was in the air. Doesn't matter if the hand touches the ground first. It is a legal knee, and if it knocks the fighter out of the fight, they're done, and there is no penalty. There is no foul.
Next up, John, Vicky Miller-Pence, who's an outstanding MMA and pro boxing judge in my home state of Kansas. This is a good question. So Vicky writes, John, on last week's podcast, you said that you try to help the judges on a submission attempt with your positioning and body language as a referee. But my training as an MMA judge has taught me that we do not assess that which we cannot see. Can you please clarify?
Well, it's very difficult for you to assess what you don't see, and what your training is telling you is right. If you can't see it, you can't say that it's there. But what we do as an official is, at times, we get judges that actually say, well, I thought, that we'll talk about a 10-8 round, and they'll say, well, I actually thought the referee was going to stop the fight. That's why I gave it a 10-8 round. Well, you're assessing the referee to a point. Well, what we do as a referee is there comes a point where not every judge where they're positioned is going to be able to see the technical application or the actual squeeze of certain submissions. So as the official inside, I'll always try to get them to understand, look at, if I'm standing straight up and that is being applied, it's telling you it's not that tight. It's not in a position where it can end the fight, because you might not be able to see the actual technical application of it. But if I get down close to it and you still can't see the technical application and you really can't tell how tight it is, me coming down close to it is at least giving you an indicator that, you know, well, I can see there's a submission hold, but I can't see how tight it is. And it's giving you the indication it's on tight. Again, you've got to go off of what you see, but I'm trying to do things to kind of give you an indicator. Is it tight or not?
We have some very smart listeners to Let's Get It On. Great questions. Keep them coming. Again, email info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On, John McCarthy will tell his story about his encounter the week in Denver, Colorado, heading into UFC 1 with King Arthur, Art Jimerson. And we will also look back at Saturday's debut of Premier Boxing Champions on NBC. Huge television audience, and our weekly poll question. Stay with us, everyone. With Big John McCarthy, I'm Sean Wheelock. You are listening to Let's Get It On. Wrestling Observer calls a must-read for any MMA fan. Jonathan Snowden of Bleacher Report describes as riveting and amazing, and TheFightNerd.com says nothing is held back. Pick this book up right away. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, written by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by John McCarthy, is now available to listeners of this podcast at the special price of $12.48. That's far less than you'll pay for the book on Amazon and half price of what you'll pay in store at Barnes & Noble. Buy it directly from the publisher now online at ascendbooks.com and enter the promo code LEGAL50. That's ASCEND books.com, promo code LEGAL50. Learn the true story of how the UFC came into existence in the book that Randy Couture describes as honest, shocking, and enthralling, and that has a rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars from Amazon Reader Reviews. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by Big John McCarthy. Available now online at ascendbooks.com for just $12.48 when you use the promo code LEGAL50.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
In Is This Legal? Art Davie and I describe your encounter, John, with Art Jimerson the week of the first UFC. Jimerson at the time was a top 10 world-ranked boxing cruiserweight and was paid $17,000 as an appearance fee to fight in the inaugural UFC. Incidentally, Taylor Tooley was the only other fighter at the first UFC to be paid an appearance fee, and he received $6,000. So, John, you're there in Denver primarily as Royce Gracie's main training partner. Go ahead and pick up the story.
Oh my God. You know, I had just gotten done training with Royce, and my wife was working as one of the travel coordinators for the first UFC with Rorion Gracie had a company called Brajitsu, and she was bringing over all of these Brazilians coming over to watch the show, and she was setting up the party and doing all the different things with Kathy Kidd, who was the event coordinator at the time. And she had this table that was we were in a place called the Executive Suite Towers or Executive Towers in Denver. And she had this little table in the lobby. And so I had come in from that, and then I was standing there talking to her, and up walked Ernest Hart, who is a longtime martial artist, who I had known before, and Art Jimerson and his wife. And his wife was really a sweet lady, very nice. And Art was, talking. They were talking about the party and stuff with my wife and stuff. And I just standing there, being stupid, which I'm good at. And then basically he looked over at me and he goes, "You're with my opponent, aren't you?" Right? And I said, "Yeah, And he goes, and he started, flashing a left jab out, and he's flicking his jab out. He said, "What's he going to do when I start hitting him with that?" Right? And I go, And the question is, can you hit him with it? And he goes, and then he, throws a couple little combinations. And I said, let me ask you a question. I said, how many times do you think that in a boxing round with someone that's, kind of an inside fighter, how many times do you think you clinch with them? And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, well, do you clinch? I said, maybe 3, 4, 5 times in a boxing match, you kind of clinch. He goes, it's possible. And I said, and in boxing, you're really not supposed to clinch, are you? I said, so what happens when the guy really wants to clinch? And he looks at it, and he's looking at me, and Ernest Hart's going, he goes, yeah. And then all of a sudden, I don't know how it really got to the point. There was this ballroom off of, the lobby that there was a door open, and there was some stuff, in there. And we kind of slipped in there. And I said, look, I'll tell you what, you throw your jabs. If you can hit me, you can hit me. It's not, it's not that you just have to throw them out. You can try to hit me, and I'll just try to get in on you. I said, and if I get in on you, I'll stop. Well, I got, I dropped levels, and when we started, and I took him with a double leg, and I just straight to mount, and I just had my hand up over him. I said, now what are you going to do? And he looked at me with these eyes that were just huge, like, oh my God. And he looked at me, what came out of his mouth was, he said, oh my God, he's going to break my arms and legs, isn't he? I was like, well, no, all you got to do is tap out. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought it was kind of, a little funny and stuff, but it was when the fight happened between Art and Royce, and I didn't know he was going to go in there with one glove or anything like that. And then, Royce mounts him, and when he gets to mount, he just puts a little bit of pressure on him, and Art's tapping, and he's like, I've been in this position before, screw this. And Horian looked over at me like, what the hell was that? And I knew I had screwed up. I knew that I had altered that I put it in his head. And I just looked, at the time I was, like the kid with his hand caught in the cookie jar. And I looked at him like, I don't know. It was my fault. I screwed it up. I definitely ruined Royce's first fight with Art. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have put it in his head that, bad things could happen when you're not fighting in your world.
As UFC founder Art Davie and I put in his book, Is This Legal?, which I co-wrote. So Art Davie pays Art Jimerson again $17,000
for that one.
And Art Davie said, here's a boxer. He never threw a punch, and he gets submitted by a guy who never put on a submission. Jimerson tapped him out. We'll definitely have Art Davie on the program to tell more of these stories, but it's amazing how crazy that was, John.
And you look back on it and it's funny, but it's the one fight. If people, a lot of people have said a lot of things about, the Gracies and Royce being in there, and they're setting things up for him. And, here comes the truth for you. Truth over all the fiction. Art Jimerson was the only opponent that was ever picked for Royce. And he was picked not because it was Art Jimerson. It could have been Mike Tyson. They wanted to put Royce against the boxer. They wanted Royce, because, in, North America, boxing was everything. And they looked at it like, you know what? We want everyone to see what a boxer does against someone that takes him down. And so that was the only fight that was ever prearranged as far as, okay, this is going to be your opponent. And Art knew that he was going to fight, Royce, and Royce knew that he was going to fight Art. And from that point on, every opponent that, Royce got was always a random pick out of almost like a bingo machine or a lotto machine. They would assign numbers and put balls in there, and they did it. It was absolutely as fair as it could be.
Well, Art Jimerson gives us a great natural transition, or segue, as we say in the broadcasting business, to our next topic. This past Saturday night on NBC television in the U.S., Al Haymon's Premier Boxing Champions made its debut, drawing 3.4 million viewers. So a couple of things to put in perspective. Huge. So this was the first time that boxing had been shown live in prime time on NBC television since May 20th, 1985, when Larry Holmes defeated Carl the Truth Williams by 15-round unanimous decision. Yes, they actually used to go 15 rounds in pro boxing. And again, to put the audience of 3.4 million viewers in perspective, John, you said it's huge. So the most recent UFC on Fox from this past January drew 2.8 million viewers. Saturday's PBC boxing on NBC drew a bigger US TV audience than every single MMA card broadcast network cable since UFC on Fox 6 from January 2013. For the people who've said boxing is dead, they might want to reassess that opinion.
Yeah. You know, I love when people say, oh, boxing's dead. I go, I tell you what, man, you're not around it here in California, Nevada, and the places where it's huge. Now, obviously, there's some places where MMA has taken over, you know, boxing, but boxing is absolutely alive and well and doing great. And, you know, it's a matter of taste. It's a choice. I really feel that, you know, why I'm happy with Al Haymon's, you know, series and what he's doing is I think it's going to help MMA. I think MMA has helped boxing. I think there is, if you're talking about the crossover, this is the crossover. You're going to get, you know, some of the old timers out of the boxing realm. They're going to be, you know, hardcore. I don't like that stuff. You know, they lay on each other or whatever it's going to be. And they're not going to like MMA. That's fine. But the more as time goes on, MMA is going to continue to get bigger, and boxing fans are going to be crossover fans with both boxing and MMA, and it's going to be which entity is putting on the better shows. And I think what Al Haymon is trying to show is, hey, the boxing of the past, I'm going to try to get away from. I'm going to get away from your granddaddy's boxing and, you know, having some guy in the middle, you know, as they walk down in their robes and, you know, standing in this corner, you know, that and stuff. He's going to start to bring some show business to it because he sees what has happened with, you know, the WWE doing what they do, and then the UFC doing what they're doing. And now look at what Bellator is doing with, you know, their shows. There is an entertainment value. You can look at the Bellator at Mohegan Sun. Take a look at the opening ceremony, you know, if you want to call it that, before any fight happened. How electric was that arena with, you know, 8,000 people in it? They were going nuts over just seeing the fighters up on the stage, those huge, you know, screens, and then a guy coming out and just on an electric guitar playing the Star Spangled Banner. The crowd was freaking unbelievably loud. The energy was huge, and that's part of entertainment. We are in the entertainment industry, and when people start to realize that and start to do things to make it entertaining, not only for the fans that are watching on TV, but entertaining for the people in the crowd, now you're talking about doing business the right way.
John, I think it's fair to say both you and I are MMA guys, but we are very, very big boxing fans. And as I was looking at the coverage of the NBC show from Saturday night, the MMA websites were all over it. And I thought that was great. I don't know anybody who's an MMA hardcore who at one point in their life didn't love boxing. That point may have been 20 or 30 years ago, but because there was no MMA for people of a certain age, say over the age of 30, because the first true MMA was November 12th, 1993 with Art Davey and Rorion Gracie's UFC 1. So we grew up watching boxing, and that was what was available. Pro wrestling and boxing for me as a kid, and that's what I gravitated to. So 3.4 million tells me that they're getting all the boxing hardcores who are watching everything. The people who watch Tuesday Night Fights on USA Network in the 90s, people who watch Friday Night Fights on ESPN2, but they were drawing in the MMA demographic. They were drawing in people like you and me, quite frankly.
Absolutely, they were. I could not watch it live. I wasn't able to do that, but I had it being DVR'd, and I watched the show because you know what? I want to see those fights. They're putting on good fights. That's the most important thing here. Are you going to put on competitive fights? Now, the fights might not, you know, on paper can be competitive, and then they turn out not to be. Or on paper, some people will say, oh, it's not going to be good. It turns out to be an incredible fight. The most important thing is your fighters come and put on a show. That's what's going to sell boxing. It's what's going to sell MMA. That's what we're looking for. That's what we need out of the fighters. They just need to go out there and compete. You know, I think the one thing that you're going to see, you know, and it's what MMA has done comparative to boxing. Boxing has always had this, you know, tried and true, you know, blueprint, I guess you want to call it, where we take a fighter, we get him out of be it the U.S. boxing team, he comes out of the Olympics with another country or something like that. We sign him and we start giving him all of these fights that are not competitive. He's just way better than the person we're putting in because we want to build his record. And then when we build his record is now 20-0. There's your magic number, the big 2-0-0. And now we'll actually start to put him against some halfway stiff competition, someone that could possibly beat him. And I think what MMA did is MMA showed, you know what, it's not so much about the fighter's record. It's about who have they fought, who have they competed against. That's what says how good they are. And I think with boxing, it's never going to get quite the same as MMA, but I think with Al Haymon, what he's looking at, I just want to put on good fights. I want to put on fights that are entertaining. I want to put on fights that people want to see. And, we've had, you look at the people that have controlled boxing for a long time, and you've got, Bob Arum with Top Rank. You've got Don King. Golden Boy came in and really, put a little bit of a wrinkle in things, and Richard Schaefer being in charge of Golden Boy, and he did a great job. Well, then he had his falling out with Oscar. Oscar's now, doing it on his own with other people. Richard Schaefer's departure and his non-compete are over. He is with Al Haymon. He is very popular with fighters. They believe in him. They trust him. And I think you're going to see huge things coming out of PBS.
Next week on Let's Get It On, we're going to have Victor Ortiz. I knew what you meant, John. It's all good. Victor Ortiz is going to be our guest, the former WBC welterweight world champion. We'll talk to Victor next week on Let's Get It On about the PBC. We'll also talk about records. And you brought up a point, and that was one of the things that started to turn me off on boxing. Not the big fights, but when I was a kid, even going back 7, 8 years old, I would literally watch every boxing on TV. It didn't matter what it was. It's that record obsession that started to turn me off. And so often on our Bellator prelims on Spike.com, I'll make the comment, if we have a 5-0 kid versus a 4-0 kid, I'll say to Jimmy, pro boxing, you don't see this fight because 5-0 is not fighting 4-0. 5-0 is fighting like 2-10, and 4-0 is fighting 0-2. You just don't see that. MMA, you can rehabilitate yourself from 3 losses. You can win 5 out of 10 fights and still fight yourself back to be extremely relevant in a world title picture in your organization. In boxing, if you don't start well, and as you say, get to that mythical 20-0, you're kind of doomed to be fighting ballrooms and National Guard armories, no matter your talent level.
It's crazy when you look at it, and you can look at either young guys or even old guys. Look at Frank Mir. Look at his last fight. All right. He has his last fight against Bigfoot Silva, right? And in that fight, he wins it. And all of a sudden, people are talking about Frank Mir again because it's like, hey, did you see that fight, man? He looked great. And they're not talking about, he had how many losses? 4 straight losses before that. But that one fight, because it was against what people would consider a quality opponent, not a can, they're going to give him credit for, hey, you look good, man. You did a good job. That was a beautiful, job of using angles, creating space, and landing a beautiful left hook to create a problem, and then going after someone with a killer instinct to finish. He didn't just hang back. He went after him. He put himself right back into the picture after having 4 losses. That's what people want to see. They want to see people going after it. And that's what MMA is about. It's not so much about the guy with the best record. We get guys that have undefeated records, and I tell everyone, Fedor had basically an undefeated record. I will never count his loss to TK, Tsuyoshi Kosaka in Japan as a loss because he got cut with a foul.
An illegal elbow.
He had an illegal elbow, and they stopped the fight and gave it to TK. Well, you can't do that. That's just not right. That's just criminal. I hate to say it. It's wrong. And so he was undefeated. 32 fights, undefeated. And everyone's saying, he's never going to lose. I'm going, he's going to lose. There is always that person that comes in the cage across from you. And sometimes it's, maybe they're not as good overall, but it's their day compared to yours. He's on a high, you're a little bit on a low, you're not feeling that good that day. That things just don't go your way. I don't see anyone ever getting through an MMA career undefeated. I just don't see it because there's too many variables to our sport. for that to happen. It can happen in boxing. You're looking at Floyd Mayweather, and he's got an undefeated record right now. He may end up keeping it. He may not. At least he's going to have someone going after it, that has the ability to take that O away from him in his next fight.
On records, Jimmy Smith and I encounter this a lot. Tiger Sarnovsky, who's a really talented lightweight in Bellator out of Russia. But when he came into Bellator, there was this suspicion because of the undefeated record, the 19-0 record. In boxing, you're supposed to be 19-0 if you're a prospect. In MMA, it seems once you get to about 12-0, 13-0, it's not, wow, this guy is great. It's this guy is being protected. Who has he fought? Why does he have this record? Truly, I think fighters get more respect with a 12-2 record than they do with a 14-0 record in MMA.
In some ways, I think you're right. It's when you get that record where you're getting all those wins and no losses, then you start looking back. Well, who the hell did he fight? And in some ways, we even see guys almost taking credit away from guys that, hey, that's a good fighter he's fighting. They're, oh, he's not that good. It's like, no, he's a good fighter. I mean, we just don't expect to see those guys with those incredible records. And Tiger Sarnovsky was one of them. You looked at him and, man, he's got some stand-up. The dude can hit, And when he came into a realm where he was fighting better fighters that were more well-rounded, we saw what happened, and he started getting a couple losses, and it's going to happen. But that's just the story of MMA. There's too many elements to bring somebody into that they have to be good at all of them. And they have to be good on that day, and they can't make the mistake, and anyone can make a mistake. It's just what happens. Sometimes we get put into situations in MMA where we have, 2 to 3 choices on what to do, and none of them are good. And it's only a matter of luck that I choose the one that the person's not expecting, and I kind of get myself out of it, where if I had chosen the other two, one of the other two, I'd have been caught and I'd have been stuck. So, MMA is a much more difficult, it's just a more difficult sport for someone to keep that consistent win without a loss coming.
Every week on Let's Get It On, we have a poll question. You can cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. This week's poll question: can Al Haymon's Premier Boxing Champion Series elevate boxing back to the interest levels of a generation ago? Vote yes or no. Again, let us know what you think. Let's get it on podcast.com. John, for me, it's a great play by Al Haymon. It's great for pro boxing. NBC, a huge debut, as we've already talked about. Spike, my network for Bellator. CBS, Showtime. I've heard rumors of ESPN and BET. But getting back to the levels where Mike Tyson was known everywhere, Muhammad Ali when he was active, Sugar Ray Leonard, that's really going to be difficult now for boxing, I think, in 2015.
Any combat sport is based upon the stars, and the Mike Tysons, the Sugar Ray Leonards, the Marvin Haglers. They're a rare breed, and it takes time to build those people up, to get them to a certain level, and to have them actually come forward with the performances that they need to come forward with to put them into that stratosphere. And, I think what Al Haymon's trying to do is he's trying to make boxing more fan-friendly. He's trying to bring in elements that have never been brought in before. He's going to be putting cameras on the trainers. I know he wants to put cameras on the referees. I hate being a cameraman and a referee, but these are the things that, because he's trying to do things that are different to help people enjoy and see things in the sport that they've never seen before. But when it comes to the building of the stars, that's a two-sided coin. You as the promoter, you've got to do your part in getting the interviews and getting the person out there that, has shown that they have the ability to be that guy. But it's all upon the fighter. The fighter's got to, prove that they are a different breed. They're just that one level up from everyone else. That's what everyone likes. That's what everyone tries to hang on to. People, like them because they want to see him win. There's other people that want to see him lose, but people watch him. And that's what every promoter is looking for, is that guy. Will Al Haymon have it? Well, we'll see. It just takes time. Is it going to happen in this year, 2015? Yeah, I doubt it. He's not going to have that grand person that just makes that huge impact that everyone's going to go with. But over time, if you're doing things right, it's going to happen.
John, you hear from media critics, from people who study sports business, people who work in the business of sports, the same criticism on pro boxing as you do on Major League Baseball, that the demographics are out of whack, that there are a lot of fans over 50, over 60 than there are, say, under 20, that in that 12 to 19 age demographic, people aren't watching pro boxing, they're not watching Major League Baseball. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but this is a thought from me. So when I was in high school, I went to a lot of parties with boxing pay-per-views in high school. Guys, girls, it was a regular occurrence. I think those same parties happen now. I just think that they're watching the UFC or Bellator. I don't know if there are a lot of suburban high school parties where people are gathering around watching a boxing pay-per-view like they did when I was in high school.
I think casual fan wise, you might be right. I think, as far as the younger generation, but the one thing I can tell you out of the younger generation by owning a gym, what I know is when we introduce people to the skills of MMA, boxing is one of those skills. And we get people that had no interest in boxing at all. All they cared about was MMA, becoming boxing fans. And so there is a crossover. Those people all of a sudden start to realize all the little intricacies and all the different things that are done in a boxing ring. And oh, it's not just these two guys that are squaring off and throwing. Oh, there's all this footwork involved. Oh, there's all these angles. Oh my God, it's hard to keep away from a guy when he keeps cutting me off and doing these things. These are all the things that people that are actually going into gyms and training a little bit, they're boxing fans now. Even if they didn't start out to be, they become boxing fans. What really has to be done is we have to get, people to understand that boxing is an incredible sport. And it's a matter of, I don't care. I tell people all the time, you could have a phenomenal, MMA match. It's great to watch. You could have a bad MMA match. It sucks to watch. Well, it's the same with boxing. Great boxing is phenomenal to watch. Bad boxing, it sucks. There's bad football games. There's bad basketball games. There's bad everything when it comes to sports because sometimes, when we put the fight together, we think it's going to be a good one. And those styles of those two fighters just don't mesh. And it makes for a hard fight for the fan to watch. But good boxing is as entertaining a sport as you'll ever see, right along with MMA. They're different, but they're both freaking awesome combat sports.
Speaking as a television guy, I was really impressed by NBC's production. Obviously, they brought out their heavy hitters. Marv Albert's taken a lot of criticism online, but just the fact that they had Marv Albert on play-by-play, they brought in Al Michaels, arguably the biggest sports commentator in the industry, at least in North America, is the host. It was a big show. It looked good. It felt good. But here's the test, not just for PBC, but look to NBC. 3.4 million viewers. If that number drops, it's not a good sign. If that number increases, it's an excellent sign. If it drops, it's basically a lot of people who haven't watched boxing in a long time were swept up in all the hype. They checked it out and they thought, yeah, I didn't really like it. But if the number increases, excellent word of mouth, and you're getting more people in. And for me, ultimately, John, it's not just making new boxing fans, it's drawing in the combat sports fans, basically drawing in the MMA audience.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way I look at it. It brings in fight fans. This is about fights. And the more that we can get good competitive fights going on, be them boxing or MMA, that's what it's all about. And yeah, that number that you're talking about, by hitting that big number that they hit is great for them. And it makes them look really good. But they've got to try to at least retain the same type of audience that they got or be close to it, or things start to look a little bit bad. And then they're going to be, instead of sitting on the high horse, they're going to be on their heels a little bit if the numbers drop off significantly. You get half of what you had, people are going to be saying, people just tuned in and then tuned out because they didn't like it. But, there's one way of looking at it. You got a guy who is sitting there saying, you know what, I'm going to make a difference in boxing. I'm going to try to do this. And he's taken a step forward. God bless him. It's no different than anybody else. Nothing gets done without the person that doesn't take the risk, doesn't take the chance. He's taken a step forward. He's working hard, and he's attempting to make something happen. God bless him. I love him for doing that. It's awesome for the sport. It's awesome for the fighters, and hopefully it's going to be awesome for the fans.
John, I guess my last point on this would be the fact that we're primarily an MMA podcast, and we're devoting a lot of time on this episode to boxing. There aren't a lot of boxing podcasts or boxing shows in general that talk about MMA. The audience seems to only cross over in one direction, and that's from the MMA fans to the boxing fans. I don't know what it is culturally or if it's an age demographic, but you don't see a lot of hardcore boxing people embracing MMA. And yet, as we've been saying throughout this conversation, most MMA fans do, or at least at one time did, really love pro boxing.
Yeah, and it's true, and it's, a lot of it has to do with, that age. You get some, guys. My dad was just incredibly into boxing. I mean, huge. And that's how I got into it, and he wanted me to box, and, and he was so into every fighter. He took me to the Olympic Auditorium at least once a month. Usually it was at least twice a month. We would go and watch fights, and I got to watch all the great, fighters that were coming up, Danny Little Red Lopez, Armando Muniz, Sugar Ray Ramos, Jose Napoles, all these guys that were just incredible boxers. I got to go see when I was a kid, and then I got to, go on and start working out at the youth center. And my dad was so into boxing to the point where, it was his favorite sport, until it got to the point where he thought that people were being corrupted. And then MMA came out, and I think because I was part of that, my dad now is a huge MMA fan, and he doesn't hardly ever watch boxing. And I tell him, boxing's great. And he goes, I'm not watching it. And so, sometimes we get people that are stubborn, like my old man, who's, sit there, and they're not going to watch MMA because I don't believe that's fighting. It's not, I don't like someone hitting somebody on the ground. And, that's just the way some people are going to be. But times are changing, and, as things go on, everything evolves and people evolve. And what we used to do, I don't care what it's in, be it in how we look at other people, how we look at other races, other genders, everything, it's all evolving to the point we're all becoming just this one. We're good people, and then there's some bad people out there, and we try to shun the bad people. Doesn't matter what race they are, what gender they are, what religion they are. We take in good people, and we take in good sports. And in taking in, people that are going out there and putting it on the line, I think that boxing fans from the past, if they didn't like it, the younger ones are going to like MMA too, and they're going to watch both. And that's what's important, that we're supporting both combat sports.
Big John McCarthy and I are back with you next week for a new episode of Let's Get It On. First available on Friday. We'll be joined by Victor Ortiz, the former WBC welterweight world champion and Dancing with the Stars cast member, to talk PBC boxing, his views on MMA. I had to get that in, as well as Victor's burgeoning film career. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And remember, you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/letsgetitonpodcast, and on Twitter @podcastmma for this show, and for us personally, @John McCarthy MMA and @Sean Wheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that is info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. For John McCarthy and our producer, Chris Lakin, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Ignotainment Media Network, online at ignotainment.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock, only on the Ignotainment Media Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in the comments section of the iTunes Podcast Store. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring the show, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, or check out our additional lineup of podcasts, including Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, The Whiskey Philosopher, and Youth Baseball Talk at ignotainment.com.